Well, it's starting to feel like spring just a little bit, but before you get outside and start planting, it's important to have a plan. So tomatoes can be one of the hardest things to grow, and that's why Brian Chadwick-Robinson joins us from Gardeners Connect, and you're here to help us. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh, yes. Thank you for having me.
All right. So tell us about the difference between heirloom tomatoes and hybrids.
Okay. It's a common confusion, and heirlooms are kind of open pollinated. They've been around for a while. They were grown by our grandparents in geographic areas. So I like to look at tomatoes that come from places like Russia and Ukraine, which have very similar climates to us.
Okay.
And so that's a good way to be successful. French ones don't do so well here because we just don't have the same kind of climate. And then hybrids were bred to be more disease resistant, have higher production values, but maybe aren't quite as tasty as some of the heirloom varieties that you can get.
And we say not quite as tasty, they're not as sweet, they're not as full. Like, what's a tasty tomato?
Well, a tasty tomato is different for everybody. So my favorite tasty tomatoes are not necessarily your favorite tasty tomatoes. And tomatoes have a broad range of flavors from all the different compounds in them. So you just have to try as many tomatoes as you can find and then say, ooh, I really like this one and this is the one I want to grow. So I always recommend that you try a new tomato plant every year because that's how you're going to find your new favorite.
Okay, you know, the ones I don't like are the ones that are kind of mushy and mealy and they just kind of do that in your mouth. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, and you probably won't get that from a homegrown tomato. There's a total difference between something that's grown in the sunshine and something that had to be picked and shipped to our grocery store. So
yeah,
there's just no comparison, but you can't get tomatoes in the middle of winter like now, so out of your garden.
So let's talk about some of these prompts that you brought here. So these tomatoes, they can get kind of heavy, so what's the best way to grow them?
So this is a typical tomato cage that you'd find at a store, and you'll see, I mean, it's pretty small, and tomatoes get really huge. So these are the tomato cages that I use at home. And so you can see that the size difference, that these are big, heavy, sturdy, huge. And the tomatoes will still grow out of the tops of the cage.
So can I bring this home, or is this just kind of one of those commercial uses?
Well, this is for home gardeners, but this is something that I decided to make because I couldn't find a commercial cage that I liked. So, you know, I did this, and it kind of folds up for storage in the winter and works out really nice. So it's just, you don't want a really tiny cage, you want a nice big heavy duty cage because tomatoes do get heavy.
But for your average person kind of growing a tomato, can I use something like this? About how many tomatoes can I grow on something like this?
You can grow between 1 and 2 tomato plants in this.
Oh, wow.
So
it'll cover a huge space.
Right.
Wow. So you have a lot of tips that you have for people that have questions about tomatoes and growing them? Yes. Share some of those with us.
Like, you don't want to grow, when you're looking at tomato plants, and I brought in some tomato plants to show, you can see that these are a little taller than these, and if they start to get taller, you can just snip these bottom leaves off, and then you want to plant the plant up the stem, and all along the stem it'll grow roots. And you want to make sure that this isn't completely root bound. If this root ball was all white, then you probably don't want to do that tomato plant. So bigger is not necessarily better when you're buying tomato plants.
All right, so talk to us about some of the classes that you have coming up.
We have, I work with Gardeners Connect, and we do garden education. And we have a tomatoes class starting next Tuesday, April the 8th and the 15th at Loose Park. It's $18 for members, $25 for non-members. And you actually get tomato plants to take home and plant. And we'll cover diseases and pests and cages, and you'll learn how to make this cage yourself. Yes.
Wow.
So there's just a lot that goes into a 4-hour class. So we're open over 2 nights.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Jenna.
All right.